We welcome all viewers to another episode of the Testimony of Saints. Today we are posting the testimony of our beloved sister Dorothy Bray, who entered glory on August 31, 1980 at Brooklyn. Sister Dorothy was one who was continually aware and thankful unto the Lord for his mercies toward her. Summing up her own experience with God, she claimed that she was only a brand plucked out of the fire, Zech 3:2. God had delivered her from a life of sin and eternal judgment, and she was eternally grateful to him. Dorothy Milne was born and brought up in England. She lived in an atmosphere of fighting, terror, and fear. Her father was a terrible drunkard and gambler. Every night he would come home in a drunken stupor, ready to fight with his family. On many occasions Sister Dorothy had to intervene to stop murder in her own home and rescue her mother. Her mother's life left a deep impression on Sister Dorothy. She remembered her mother's silent suffering undergirded with faith in God. To Sister Dorothy this was a real example of Christian love in action, a sermon beyond words. Due to these early experiences, she developed great bitterness of spirit against God. In fact, she soon grew to deny his very existence. She turned to the world with its wealth, its fame, and its pleasures. She attended church regularly to sing beautiful solos in the choir, but none of these meant anything to her. Every night it was a case of dancing and theaters. She lived such a busy social life that her health soon weakened. At the age of 17 she had a nervous breakdown. Later she was afflicted with pneumonia, and later yet was stricken with tuberculosis. There was no human help or cure left for her. The doctor told her that no one, except God, could help her. At one point of desperation and despair she attempted suicide. Just then she heard a clear voice speak to her saying, "Only the pure in heart can see God." That was her first encounter with God. After that she began to make a diligent search for the truth. Finally she went to a Pentecostal meeting where she experienced the presence of God as never before. She was miraculously healed that night by the power of God, and she gave her heart to the Lord with a firm decision to live for Him.
Sister Dorothy then married a young Christian by name Leslie Bray, and together they enjoyed a life of peace and happiness. A few months later she had a vision in which she saw young ladies dressed in saris from India calling her to help them. She wanted to ignore this call and continue her happy life with her husband, but soon her husband had a vision in which he relived his former commitment to serve God full-time. They both knelt and consecrated their lives to serve God in the East, to preach the gospel freely, looking only to God to supply all their needs. The path was not easy. In 1932 they left England and sailed to Colombo, Ceylon, today called Sri Lanka, where they arrived on April 8. They were some of the earliest missionaries in that country. They lived and moved with the people, entering into their everyday lives. They dressed as the people of the land, ate their food, and slept on the floor. Sister Dorothy went barefoot for 17 years. They ministered mostly to the poor whom they loved and with whom they identified themselves. Many days they spent without food and drink. But their joy was boundless and their work was fruitful and rewarding. In 1949 they were sent back to England to begin a work. They had to start all over again with much suffering and hardship. But the Lord blessed their labors in Newark and later in London. Even though Sister Dorothy's husband, Pastor Leslie, entered glory while in the ministry in 1959, Sister Dorothy continued steadfastly serving the Lord in churches in England. Later, she was transferred to Brooklyn, New York, where for the past 7 years she ministered day and night to build up a glorious church for the Lord. Everyone who knew Sister Dorothy can testify of her tireless efforts, her motherly love and concern, and her deep love and devotion for our blessed Lord. Sister Dorothy readily testified that during the 48 years that she served the Lord, He had never failed her. Christ had been her Savior, her healer and her keeper. Many times. She had been at the point of death, but the Lord raised her up. Her most recent experience is given in the following testimony. In May of 1980, Sister Dorothy suddenly fell ill. She began bleeding from the eyes, ears, nose and mouth. At that time she suffered a stroke which left her paralyzed and in a coma for 3 days. Recovering from that condition, she said, "I was with the Lord and He healed me with His stripes and sanctified me for further ministry." She told of being taken to Mount Zion, which she described as marvelous, wonderful, beautiful. To the amazement of the brethren, she was miraculously restored. Later, she went to Washington for rest, during which time she was able to teach, encourage, and build up the new servants of God. Her very presence was a source of great inspiration to all. A few days before her passing away, she had a dream of being with some of the dear departed saints, hour of her departure. She gave instructions concerning her funeral. The next day she collapsed. After 4 days of continuous prayers made on her behalf, the Lord removed her suffering. Her last words were, "I am healed. Healed." Pointing upward she said, "Higher. Higher, higher." A few hours before she passed away, the brethren committed her to the Lord whom she loved with all her heart and whom she also served faithfully for 48 years. She had fought a good fight. She had finished the race. She kept the faith. Her crowns await her. May God bless you all. For getting regular updates onto our channel, please subscribe our channel. Thanks you once again.